Orly Borelstein here, and I've been busy. Mostly with school and work, but who gives a fuck about that? It's the holiday season, and you've been seeing advertisements for all sorts of garbage dog shit that you're probably wondering, what the hell can I go take my family to see that will at least entertain me long enough and not and offend anybody so you can just slide into a coma and wait for death? Well, that movie is Knives Out. Now, Knives Out is a film directed by Ryan Johnson, who I've never fucking heard of until, I guess, Star Wars. I think he did Brick, which is an okay film, but we're not going to talk about that. Knives Out is a kind of murder mystery clue-esque game, but not really, because you know the main mystery about 30 minutes into the movie, and then it's about kind of unraveling the mystery, or the mystery unravels in that it becomes found out, and then a new mystery kind of develops, and then it's left with this hanging question that is a bit of a moral one. It's a political film, I should say. A quick overview of it: the acting I thought was pretty good. Everybody plays a character who is rememberable. For the most part, they're all upper middle class white people, except for Anna De Armas. Is that her name? She's like the maid. She does a good job. Everyone does a good job. Uh, Even the two detectives, they leave an impression, even though they're like not even in the rest of the film. I don't think. I don't really remember them too much later. They all leave a really good impression. So all the characters are pretty striking. So that's good. The music, I don't remember it. Sound design, I remember it slightly. The sound design is important in terms of uncovering the plot. They really use, what characters hear, what other characters are saying, jacking off in the bathroom. If you see the movie, that's a reference you'd understand, but otherwise, whatever, fuck it. So the sound design, I think, was pretty good. The music, I don't fucking remember at all. It was serviceable. I would say it's about like a 4 or 5. The acting is like a 5 or 6. It's pretty good. It's entertaining. The story, I thought the plot was good. The story, I think, is even better though, but you have to kind of like you have to think more about it. So like the plot is what we see visually. The story is the parts that happen between what we see. So like if you had like a time skip in a movie from 5 years on, the story is everything that happens from the first shot to the end of the film and all the spaces between stuff that we don't see. That's the story. And the plot is what we see on the camera. So this film has a good plot, but I think it has a better story, and that has to do with the politics of the film. I'm not really going to talk too much about the overall plot. I'm going to mostly spend my time talking about the politics, because I think that's where the film is actually interesting. So if you had any interest in seeing this movie, just go watch it. It's entertaining. If you can see it for like $8, I would. I had some fun. But it's a political film. And the first political aspect happens when there's a flashback to an argument about, illegals coming into the country. Now, to give you a little bit of preface, the family is all like upper middle class. It seems that each of the children of the grandfather all enjoy at least 100K a year income through some means or another, pretty comfortably. We know that the one lady was getting 100K stolen from her daughter's tuition. She was like double dipping. One guy is in charge of the father's book business because he writes books, the grandfather. And then some of the other people are just kind of like basically given money to do abso-fucking-lutely nothing. And from what we see from the vehicles they drive to the places that they live, they're not hard up for cash. They're doing just fine. So they're all arguing about immigrants coming into the country, and then it becomes like about like, oh, but like the maid, like, because they're like, oh, how could you say that when we have this South American maid here, blah blah blah. And then the one guy who's like the most racist one, who says they should come over here legally, blah blah blah, without actually understanding how fucking horrible immigration is to America, at least from South America. And if you don't have money, that he's like, oh, but she came over here the right way and did it legally, but he's wrong. Anna De Armas's character, her mom, actually is an illegal, and one of the characters in the family knows this, which becomes blackmail later on. So it gets found out. Grandpa dies, and he leaves all of his inheritance to the maid. Now, obviously, some people, start speculating, oh, you fucking my dad, things like that, because it's kind of peculiar. You have this grandfather character who's been taking care of his family his whole life, and then at the last moment, he's like, fuck everybody, I'm gonna give it all to the hot maid, right? It seems a little suspicious. Now, the film never dips into that territory. It doesn't go full subversion. It doesn't go full crazy where it's like, you know, Anna was the bad character the whole time. I don't remember her name, but just the actress's name, the maid. She wasn't the bad character ever. But there are some characters who like you think are like, wow, that guy's irredeemable, and then he's like, oh, maybe he's interesting, and then he's like, nope, still shit. And actually, he's even more shit, is what it was. Now there was one potential twist in the film with the grandfather that I thought they were gonna do, but I think it just turns out because the film is like rated PG or something, or maybe PG-13. But there's a scene where he cuts his neck and he pulls it across his throat, and they show it go across his throat, but he just nicks himself like he's been shaving, and that's it. There's no real blood. But we see another shot where it's like cut and he's like bleeding everywhere. That led me to believe that the grandfather wasn't dead. No, he's dead. So initially you have people in this upper middle class white family who are like, oh, they should come over here legally. And some of them are like, oh, no, if you were in that situation, you do the same thing. And so they basically kind of run the gambit of upper middle class white opinions, which is that some of them are more sympathetic and some of them are more like, rule of law kind of bullshit. But when they find out that Ana de Armas's character inherits all the money, they pretty much all turn on a dime and they're like, we've been so good to you, taking you into our home, blah, blah, blah. And that's where the film transcends the script and becomes about our current dynamic. That there's these, like, white people, these kind of white moderate people who, they're not, I don't think anybody in the film would identify as a Republican, but they're all skeptical on immigration. And they kind of run the gamut of opinions. But then when it comes to them actually having to basically put up or shut up, then suddenly they're like, "Oh, fuck you, we let you in here, we've taken good care of you, blah blah blah, and you can't take from us." But the thing is, though, is that the only person who seemingly has done any actual work in the film is the maid. The daughter, or one of the two daughters, is lazy as shit. The youngest son, or the grandson, he's lazy as shit. The Captain America character, he's lazy as shit, doesn't do anything. Uh, the one guy manages the publishing company. That's about it. And they're all really just seedy and awful people for the most part. They all have really horrible opinions, or they're just kind of lazy. And they've been, taken care of their whole life. And I think if you can get symbolic of the film, the grandfather is kind of like the government. The government basically really gave white people a lot of handouts when it came to, accumulating wealth in America. In 1933, the government enacted a loan system for people to buy homes, that the government would back the mortgages of. I don't know if they actually started backing the mortgages back then, but they started this process in 33 where they would make the loan process easier, where you could afford the loans, because beforehand loans were terrible. So they basically create the mortgage system. And then until, I think, is it 76? I think it was 66 actually. Sometime in the 60s or 70s, they actually changed it so that they made it so that it was like the American Reinvestment Act or something, where they made it so that these loan programs could not discriminate based on race. Because for the longest time, if you were black, even if you were white, but you didn't have a family, you could not get a mortgage as easy as a white family with children or expecting. Like, that was the top level. White with children, or white with children or expecting children, you would have the easiest time getting a federally backed mortgage, given that all other criteria is the same, like income and stuff like that. But if you were black and you had kids and you had that income somehow, you were probably not getting a mortgage for a home. And so it wasn't for about like 30 years, the government was basically given a handout, free mortgages, backed by the government, to buy homes. And what did that do? It increased home ownership immensely for everybody that was white, basically. And then in 96, they finally extended that same thing to Native Americans. That's a whole other story. But that's what I'm getting at, is that for a long time, the government favored white people. And for the most part, it still kind of does, because the government is mostly made up of rich white people. But then, the government does something for minorities. Now, our government has never cut a break for minorities to the extent that the grandfather in this film has. But you can imagine the kind of resentment that would exist in the white populace if that ever were to happen. And that's what this film, I think, explores, is that, the grandfather took care of these people for so long, allowed them to benefit immensely. And it even has a line in the film to kind of call upon this, like, the word the character uses is ancestral. The character says, "This is our ancestral home." And then the one guy corrects him and says, "You bought this 30 years ago. Your grandfather bought this 30 years ago from people from India." Usurping this idea is like, you might have this idea that this is your ancestral home and somehow your birthright, or you're owed this, the sense of entitlement. But the reality is it just comes down to fucking money. And even less so is that, I'm pretty sure the line is bought it from people from India, but you get the usage of that word correctly, that they bought it from people from India, the same way white people went across the United States and took the land from Indians, people from India. So I think the film is very intentionally political, especially at the end of the film. She doesn't give the house up. She has a little coffee cup in the beginning of the film that they show that says, like, "My house, my rules," whatever, something like that. And she's drinking the cup and it says "my house." Now, I think a Republican's take on the film would be that it's about, white people being replaced, hardworking white people being replaced by minorities. But the problem is like, none of the white people in this film are really hardworking, so that narrative doesn't fly. But the replacement part could be kind of true. But the reality is that the narrative spun by Republicans often is that if you work hard, you'll be able to come up in life. And there's a degree of luck that comes with that. Anna de Armas's character was lucky. She got all the inheritance given to her, and now she's been able to come up in life. But all those other people who've never had to work suddenly are really pissed because now they have to share, something that they thought that they were entitled to with somebody who worked for it, where none of them did. So I thought the political messaging in the film is what makes it the most interesting, and I thought it was pretty good. It wasn't like ridiculously ham-fisted as Star Wars. After watching this, I don't really blame Rian Johnson for Star Wars being so bad. I can imagine what's that, Kathleen Kennedy? I think she's the top person at Disney. I imagine somebody like barking over her shoulder, like, "Oh, this scene's got to have more feminist sting to it," or "This scene's got to have fucking farting telephone jokes," or whatever. I don't know. Like, he didn't seem incompetent in this film. It was a very decent film, and the accent's hilarious that the characters put on at times. So, yeah, pretty good. Thanks for listening. And if you have something dumb to say, go ahead and type in the comments. I'll respond to you, and we can have an argument.